Same thing as far as families goes for herbivores. If you're looking at introducing animals into your system or utilizing animals that are already there, you're going to focus on herbivores that are large, larger than squirrel size. You don't want to spend a lot of time trying to catch animals and eat them that are smaller than that. They conveniently fall into families, and our modern food system relies heavily on cattle, but that's just one family of many we could be using to make meat, to fill that ecological niche. So there's tylopods, camels, and llamas. There's just a few. This is all the animals in the northern temperate zones. All the big herbivores just fit in these few families. Same thing with the big herbivorous birds. Geese, chickens, pigeons, ostriches, emus. Fish list is going to be a lot longer, but one fish family of note is the cypriniforms, like carp, because they're vegetarians. They low on the food chain. You can support a lot of them. And don't forget invertebrates. People still eat invertebrates like lobsters, even bugs. When I said things need to be bigger and wilder, I mean really big and really wild. I told you about how we've lost so many of our megafauna to early human hunting in the Pleistocene. There may be some things we can do to restore that form of diversity. There's a movement called Pleistocene rewilding. Josh Donlin is one of its pioneers. He writes for Nature and other places. But we can replace a lot of these animals with very similar animals. May not be the best idea here because it's kind of cold, but we're thinking we can maybe replace mammoths and mastodons with surviving elephants, maybe in Texas and New Mexico, where they can browse on legume trees just like they do in Africa. We can replace bison with plains bison. And there's actually a woods bison that lives in Alaska and in Europe that eats more browse than grass. So if you live in a wooded area, it would be really cool if we get some woods bison. And there are a host of other bovids. We're talking yaks. What are those things? The ones they raise in Asia, like the guars and a whole bunch of other bovids we could use. In the bison niche, there used to be shrub oxen here that were related to muskox, and they were really cool because they ate sagebrush and rabbit brush. Cattle can't do that. So when you put cattle on a piece of land, the grassland degenerates, and you get a landscape taken over by brush that is not edible to the animals you're using, which is the unfortunate thing about losing species. So yeah, maybe we can fill that niche with other bovids, or how far south can we bring the muskox, I wonder. There used to be giant moose. We still have moose. There used to be horses. We wiped them out here, but then they came back. And we have wild horses in many parts of the western U.S., and there are all kinds of species we can bring back. We had tapirs, and there's actually a tapir that lives in temperate zones called the mountain tapir, somewhere in the Andes. They make a good substitute. Camels, I think, are really interesting. It's less feasible that we're going to bring back the elephants as large browsers, which would actually tip over conifer trees and eat pines and firs and spruces and regulate the forest. But camels are a good next choice. They browse on juniper and pines, and they think that a lot of the juniper encroachment going on in the southwest could be alleviated if we brought back large browsers like camels. And if we had, say, camels in with bison or cattle, it would be really great because the camels would take care of the woody vegetation, and there'd be more grass for the grazers. And there's a whole list of them. And you'll note that there are just a few that are just gone for good, that don't have near relatives surviving on the planet today. It's ground sloths, mastodons, and leptodons. So if we really wanted to, we could bring back a lot of that diversity, and I think that would be an awesome idea. We got to think beyond just cows. Cows are boring. Um, we're finishing up. Are we running into dinner? You guys willing to sit this out with me?
6:10.
Okay. You guys,
We're not
I won't be
dinner
offended
here,
if
so
you-
it doesn't matter.
Okay, so I tell people you need to build a food forest. You need to restore your habitat, and the only real example that they can think of is an orchard. But an orchard is a long shot. It's way out. First of all, if you look at an orchard like the kind you see in central Washington, all the plants are in the rose family. They're fighting for the exact same resources. They all have the same ecological niches, so they're competing. They're all clones of each other. Like, you don't plant apples in different varieties. They're actually all the same variety. They have the exact same genetics. And if a pest should come through there that's good at exploiting one variety, you're going to lose the whole orchard to it, or you're going to have to spray. The trees are all dwarfed. They get smaller and smaller. They invest more of their energy in their fruit and less of their energy in maintaining themselves. The highest production orchards for apples, the apple trees can't even support themselves anymore. They're growing them on trellises. They're making them weedy. They're breeding a weedy apple. They space them way too close. Apple trees do great in the wild in this region, but you'll never find them grow in root zone or root zone. They'll be here and there. And rose family plants were never meant to exist in monocultures, unlike some species like pines. Pines can grow really close together. Apples and in rose family plants do not have good disease resistance, and so they like to be scattered on the landscape. Grass ground cover is a bad idea. It's funny. The Pondo pine environment is great for growing apples. It's where all the apple production used to be because you didn't have to irrigate it. So the first settlers, their apple production regions were higher altitude, places like Spokane. But we've all moved it into the desert where we have to irrigate the crops. And the reason we've done that is because it's a little warmer there and because on colder years we don't lose the crop. So the climate is kind of inappropriate. The apples belong in moister, more mountainous regions. We need more appropriate crops for the desert. You have to irrigate it because they're too close together and it's in the desert. And they're small trees with puny root systems. You have to fertilize and spray it. And there's no animals. That should be the dead giveaway. But wait a minute. This is not good. There are no animals here. I wonder if I'm going to live here if no other animal does. I talked about how they're all clones. Apples want to breed. They want to mix their genetics up. They want to have sex and make new varieties. And we all know that the bad things happen when sexual creatures are sexually repressed. And we get Humvees and teenagers and World of Warcraft addicts. If you want a really good example of a more natural kind of food production system, go out and look at the lower margins of the ponderosa pine forest or a talus garland community in the sagebrush steppe. So this is very typical of the landscape around Spokane. We've got widely spaced ponderosa pine trees. Next down, we've got service berries, which are a great wild fruit. They produce a ton of fruit. It's tasty. Next layer down, we've got forbs. We've got balsam root, and the little roots on balsam root are actually good eating. You steam them, you eat them, and they also make edible seeds. And the next layer down, you've got grass, which feeds the herbivores, which can in turn feed you. It's a complete system, unlike an orchard. So I'll talk more about talus garlands in the next few slides. But here's another great example of polyculture in the talus garland community out in the desert. So we've got service berries, they're kind of taller plants, and you also have choke cherries doing the same thing. And then down below you've got the native golden currants, which actually are better tasting than the cultivated currants from Europe. Rose bushes. I know there's other bushes that grow here that are edible. But you also have nettles and leafy things like goldenrod. That should be more what we shoot for. And in some places this is already existent. We could augment both these systems by maybe trying to use proxies by, say, swapping out a service berry with an apricot, or swapping out a currant with a gumi. Another thing to consider when you're restoring your habitat is temporal diversity. You want to make sure that you've got your food spread as far throughout the year as you can. I like this illustration because it shows just how much of the year you fill with fruit. You got late ripening kinds of plants like sorbus. Like I can still pick fruit here in November. Apples, pears, and then according to my reading, I don't have this plant myself yet, but silverberry might ripen in the early springtime because it actually flowers in the fall and then doesn't have to make that step in the spring. It's ready for fruit. Honeyberries a close second, and strawberries are other early fruits. This is just a handful of the species represented by the family list I showed you earlier. Here's talus carless. Here's a better illustration. So one of the big obstacles we have in this region in making these habitats for ourselves is water scarce. And in nature we can find solutions. Talus it's rock slide areas. It's chunky rocks. And I've observed that talus on north slopes will grow abundant vegetation. These are all serviceberry and chokecherry trees along the edge of this cliff, whereas you can see the rest of the landscape is really dry. And it can't support a lot of the things that we like to eat. We can mimic this. On a friend's place, I've got an experimental talus garland community going. We'll stack rocks east to west, and then in the wintertime when the sun's low, it keeps the sun off the soil here, so it keeps the soil cool and damp. Snow will remain there longer. The stones themselves actually seal a lot of the water in the soil and they prevent competition with grass. The rocks condense water from the air. A stone pile will actually act as kind of a drip irrigation system. It's a known technique that they use in the Middle Eastern deserts to grow grapes and stuff. So pile of stones will condense moisture. Also, critters will live in the stones, like pack rats, and their existence is beneficial because they'll provide nutrients to the roots of the tree. And it's cool because only the roots are covered while the tree can actually grow up into the sunlight and make full use of the sunshine. But we may actually have more sunlight than we need in this region to grow fruit trees. A lot of the best fruit trees grow in really deep canyons where they don't get much sunlight. Here's another illustration of how topography can really affect how much moisture is available. You see this a lot around here. Aspects. So you got the trees on the north-facing side. That's the only area where there's enough moisture maintained to grow a forest. And it doesn't have to be pine trees. You can see another one here with bushes. They could very well be fruit bushes. So this area receives the same amount of rainfall, but there's different levels of moisture available because of the way it's facing, and we can design it into our own landscapes. One of the problems with the inland Northwest is that places that are low altitude and warm enough to grow a lot of these things that we want to grow are dry because all our moisture happens in the mountains, as you can see from this map. So you can either live in the mountains and grow really hardy things, or you can try to do something with the water system. Another example is I don't know if you're familiar with hugelkultur, but wood in and on the soil retains moisture and does a lot of other great things for plants. And you can see this in the form of slash piles. If you walk through the woods, look for places where they piled up the slash, and where things like rose bushes, this is a rose bush take hold, they get big. This works for elderberries, chokecherries, roses, and different forbs too will go nuts here. where the rest of the landscape may be dry, maybe grassland. But getting wood in the soil is another way we can passively irrigate without having to drain the rivers and the aquifers and just let the rain do the work. Almost done here. One last illustration I have is another thing we need to do in our habitat is to close the nutrient loop. These things are all connected. If you're on a property, eating fruit, having a fire, eating meat, having animals, all these things can benefit each other. It doesn't need to be a work and waste situation. Any questions? That's it.
Thank you.
That was a lot of information.
Yeah, it was like a college course solid. 3 hours.
It was 3 hours.
Yeah. That was a lot. Do you have a lot of this on? You said you had a website?
Yeah.